Oliver Thompson stood at the edge of his small bedroom, staring out the window of their cramped apartment in the industrial town of Manchester. The rain pelted against the glass, mirroring the tears he was desperately trying to hold back. At 22, life had not been kind to him. Just 6 months ago, he had been working at the local factory, proud to contribute to his family's survival. His mother, Margaret, was a nurse who worked endless shifts at the community hospital, her hands rough from constant work and her spirit unbroken. They weren't rich, but they had managed to survive together. The factory closure had been sudden. Hundreds of workers, including Oliver, were left without jobs. The manufacturing plant that had been the town's economic backbone for decades had finally crumbled under economic pressures. One day, Oliver was a reliable worker, and the next, he was just another unemployed statistic. Every morning, he would wake up early, put on his only decent shirt, and walk through the grey streets of Manchester. The job hunt was relentless and soul-crushing. Resume after resume was sent out, each rejection feeling like a personal failure. Local businesses were struggling, and jobs were scarce. Margaret never complained. She would wake up before dawn, prepare a simple breakfast, and kiss Oliver's forehead before heading to her nursing shift. "Something will come up," she would say, her eyes tired but hopeful. Her unwavering belief was the only thing that kept Oliver going. Their small apartment told the story of their struggle. Second-hand furniture, carefully mended clothes, and a kitchen with bare essentials. But there was always warmth, always love. Margaret had raised Oliver alone, working multiple jobs to ensure he could get an education. Oliver had dreams once. He wanted to study business management, to create opportunities not just for himself but for others in his community. But dreams cost money, and money was something they didn't have. Each rejected job application felt like another nail in the coffin of his aspirations. The local library became his sanctuary. Free Wi-Fi, warm space, and a chance to search for job opportunities. He would spend hours there, researching, applying, hoping. The librarian, an elderly woman named Helen, would sometimes bring him a cup of tea, understanding the weight of his silent struggle. One particularly cold morning, as Oliver scrolled through job listings, something caught his eye. A community center was looking for an assistant. The pay was modest, but it was a job. More importantly, it was an opportunity to do something meaningful. His hands trembled as he prepared his application. Every word mattered. Every sentence could be the difference between hope and continued struggle. He thought about his mother, about the sacrifices she had made, about the belief she had in him. The town around him seemed to reflect his internal turmoil. Once thriving industrial buildings stood like ghosts, windows broken, paint peeling. Manchester had seen better days, and so had Oliver. But beneath the grey exterior, there was resilience, a quiet determination that refused to be defeated. He remembered his father's old saying, "Thompson men don't quit." His father had passed away when Oliver was just a child, but his mother had kept his memory alive through stories of hard work and integrity. As the rain continued outside, Oliver finished his job application. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would be the turning point of his life. The community center job was more than just employment, it was a beacon of hope in a world that had seemed increasingly dark. Margaret would be home soon. He would show her the application, and she would smile that could make the coldest day feel warm. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The clock ticked. The rain continued. And in that small apartment in Manchester, a young man's destiny was about to change. The morning of the interview arrived with a nervous energy that seemed to fill every corner of Oliver's small bedroom. He had spent hours the night before preparing, ironing his only decent suit, a slightly worn navy blue piece he'd bought from a local charity shop. Margaret had carefully pressed out every wrinkle, her hands moving with a mother's precision and hope. Robert Williams, the community center manager, was known throughout Manchester as a tough, no-nonsense professional. He had seen countless job applicants come and go, and he had a reputation for seeing right through people's rehearsed speeches and polished presentations. Oliver stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. His reflection showed a young man caught between desperation and determination. The suit, though second-hand, was clean and pressed. His shoes, carefully polished the night before, reflected the morning light. He looked presentable, but more importantly, he looked ready. The community center was an old brick building in the heart of the industrial district. Once a warehouse, it had been transformed into a hub of local activity. Community classes, youth programs, and support groups found their home within its walls. For Oliver, this place represented more than just a potential job, it was a lifeline. As he walked the familiar streets of Manchester, memories of his recent struggles played in his mind. The factory closure, the endless job rejections, the financial pressure that had been weighing on his family. Each step towards the interview was a step towards potential redemption. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile. "Oliver Thompson," she asked, checking her clipboard. He nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. Years of job hunting had taught him that first impressions matter, and he was determined to make a good one. Robert Williams sat behind a large desk, his reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Files and documents were neatly arranged around him, suggesting a man who valued order and precision. When Oliver entered, Williams looked up, his eyes immediately assessing the young man standing before him. "Sit down," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Oliver sat, his back straight, hands clasped tightly in his lap. He could feel a drop of sweat forming on his forehead, despite the cool morning temperature. "Tell me why you want this position," Robert said, his eyes never leaving Oliver's face. It was the moment Oliver had prepared for. But preparation could never fully calm the storm of emotions inside him. This wasn't just another job interview. This was a chance to change everything. He took a deep breath and began to speak. He talked about his experiences in the factory, about understanding the challenges of working-class communities. He spoke about his mother, a nurse who dedicated her life to helping others. He shared his vision of how a community center could be more than just a building, it could be a beacon of hope. Robert Williams listened. His expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of interest, perhaps even recognition. Oliver spoke about the local youth who needed guidance, about the elderly residents who needed connection, about the working-class families struggling to stay afloat. He wasn't just asking for a job, he was offering a commitment. As he spoke, the nervousness began to fade. His passion became evident. This wasn't a rehearsed speech, this was his life, his dreams, his understanding of community. The interview continued. Questions about management, about handling different personalities, about creating inclusive programs. Oliver answered each one, drawing from his personal experiences and observations. Outside, Manchester continued its daily rhythm. Factories hummed in the distance, people rushed to work, life continued. But in this small office, something significant was happening, a young man was fighting for his future. When the interview concluded, Oliver wasn't sure how he had performed. But he knew one thing, he had been completely, authentically himself. Little did he know, that authenticity would change everything. The community center buzzed with activity, a far cry from the quiet desperation Oliver had known just months ago. As the new program coordinator, he found himself juggling responsibilities that would have seemed impossible before. Mornings began early. Oliver would arrive before anyone else, preparing schedules, organizing volunteer rosters, and planning community programs. The work was relentless, but something had changed within him. Each challenge became an opportunity, each obstacle a chance to prove himself. Margaret noticed the transformation in her son. The tired, defeated young man had been replaced by someone with purpose. During their shared dinners, Oliver would excitedly discuss the center's latest initiatives. A reading program for local children, support groups for unemployed workers, skills workshops for seniors. One particularly challenging week tested Oliver's resolve. A funding issue threatened to cancel a crucial youth mentorship program. The local council had been hesitant about continuing support, citing budget constraints. Oliver knew this program was more than just an activity, it was a lifeline for many young people in Manchester. He remembered Jimmy, a 15-year-old participant who had found hope through the mentorship program. Jimmy came from a troubled family, struggling with poverty and limited opportunities. The program had become his sanctuary, offering guidance and potential he'd never seen before. Late one evening, Oliver sat surrounded by spreadsheets and budget reports. The fluorescent lights of the community center flickered, casting long shadows across the room. He was determined to find a solution, to prove that community programs were worth investing in. Helen, the elderly librarian who had become a supportive friend, would often bring him coffee during these late nights. "You're making a difference," she would say, her weathered hands patting his shoulder. Her belief gave him strength. The challenges were constant. Some days, volunteers would fail to show up. Other days, funding would seem impossibly tight. Local businesses were struggling, and community resources were stretched thin. But Oliver refused to give up. He began reaching out to local businesses, creating partnerships that could support the center's programs. A local bakery started providing free bread for community meals. A small tech company offered free computer classes for unemployed workers. Slowly, the community began to rally around the center. Margaret watched her son with pride. She saw the same determination that had carried her through years of single parenthood. "You're becoming a true leader," she would tell him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The youth mentorship program became Oliver's passion project. He worked with local schools, identifying students who needed extra support. Jimmy was just one of many success stories, young people finding direction, hope, and opportunity through the center's programs. Community meetings became more frequent. Oliver learned to listen, truly listen, to the needs of local residents. An elderly woman struggling with loneliness. A young father looking for job training. A teenager trying to escape the cycle of poverty. Each story became a mission. Winter brought additional challenges. Heating costs threatened to overwhelm the center's limited budget. Oliver worked tirelessly, writing grant proposals, reaching out to local donors, finding creative solutions to keep the center running. His days were long. Morning meetings would blend into evening programs. Volunteer training, community outreach, program management. Oliver did it all with a passion that surprised even himself. The shy, uncertain young man was gone, replaced by a confident community leader. The transformation wasn't just professional. Oliver was learning about himself, about community, about the power of believing in something greater than himself. Each small victory, a child learning to read, an unemployed worker finding a job, a senior finding connection, felt like a personal triumph. As the year drew to a close, Oliver reflected on his journey. From a struggling job seeker to a community coordinator, he had found his purpose. The community center was more than a job, it was a calling. Manchester was changing. And Oliver Thompson was at the heart of that change, one small act of kindness at a time. The funding crisis hit like a sudden storm. Oliver stood in the community center's main hall, surrounded by worried staff and concerned volunteers. The local council had announced significant budget cuts that threatened to eliminate several critical programs. Jimmy, the teenage participant who had become a symbol of the center's success, watched with worried eyes. He knew what these cuts meant: lost opportunities, destroyed dreams. Oliver could see the fear in the young man's face, a reflection of the entire community's anxiety. Margaret heard the news during her nursing shift. She knew how much the center meant to her son, how much it meant to their community. That evening, she brought home extra sandwiches from the hospital canteen, sensing Oliver would need support. The numbers were brutal. Almost 60% of the center's programs were at risk. Youth mentorship, elderly support groups, job training, everything hung in a delicate balance. Oliver knew he couldn't let these programs die. They were more than just services, they were lifelines for people struggling to survive. He began working late into the night, developing a strategy. Spreadsheets covered his small desk, each page a potential solution. Local businesses had been struggling too, making traditional funding routes challenging. Oliver needed something different, something extraordinary. Helen from the library became his unexpected ally. She introduced him to local community leaders, helping him understand the intricate network of Manchester's social support system. Her decades of community work provided invaluable insights. Oliver decided to organize a community fundraiser unlike any the town had seen before. He wanted to show the true impact of the center's work. Personal stories would become their strongest weapon. Jimmy agreed to share his journey. From a troubled teenager with limited prospects to a motivated student with clear goals, his story was powerful. Other participants began sharing their experiences: an elderly woman who found companionship, a single father who learned job skills, a young woman who discovered her academic potential. The local newspaper caught wind of the story. A journalist named Thomas Richards began documenting the center's work, creating a series of articles that highlighted the critical role of community support programs. Social media became an unexpected ally. Oliver created simple, heartfelt videos showing the center's impact. Each video told a human story, raw, honest, and deeply moving. People from across Manchester began sharing these stories, creating a wave of community support. Local businesses started taking notice. A small manufacturing company offered initial funding. A tech startup provided free digital marketing support. The community was slowly rallying behind the center. The fundraising event was scheduled for a cold Saturday in November. Oliver worked tirelessly, coordinating volunteers, preparing presentations, and ensuring every detail was perfect. Margaret helped by cooking food for the event, her famous homemade sandwiches becoming a draw for many. Council members began to take notice. The personal stories, the community support, the transparent reporting, everything was building momentum. What had started as a potential disaster was transforming into an opportunity. On the night of the fundraiser, the community center was packed. People from all walks of life came together, young and old, working class and professionals, people who had been helped by the center and those who wanted to help. Jimmy spoke first, sharing his personal journey. His voice, once timid, now carried confidence and hope. Other participants shared their stories, each narrative a testament to the center's importance. Oliver watched, his heart racing. This was more than a fundraiser. This was a statement about the power of community, about hope, about collective action. As the evening progressed, donation boxes filled. Local businesses pledged support. Council members who had initially planned budget cuts now spoke about the center's vital role. Something magical was happening. A community was discovering its own strength, its own potential for change. The turning point had arrived, and nobody understood its significance more than Oliver Thompson, a young man who had transformed from a struggling job seeker to a community leader. One small act of hope at a time, the first rays of morning sunlight crept through the community center's windows, casting a warm glow on Oliver Thompson's face. It had been a year since that crucial fundraiser, and everything had changed. The center now buzzed with energy and hope. Programs that were once on the brink of closure now thrived. Jimmy, the teenage success story, stood beside Oliver, no longer the uncertain youth but a confident young man preparing to start university. Margaret watched her son with tears in her eyes. The transformation was complete. Oliver had become more than just a job coordinator, he was a community leader, a beacon of hope for Manchester's working-class families. The local council had not only restored funding but increased support for the center's programs. What began as a desperate attempt to save community services had become a model for urban community development. Other towns were now looking to Manchester's approach as an example of grassroots transformation. Oliver's days were full. Morning meetings with community leaders, afternoon mentorship sessions, evening skill-building workshops. Each program carried the DNA of his original vision: hope, opportunity, connection. The town had changed. Businesses that once seemed on the verge of closing now found new life. Young people who might have lost hope now saw real possibilities. The community center had become more than a building, it was a symbol of collective strength. Thomas Richards, the local journalist who had first covered Oliver's story, wrote a feature article celebrating the center's success. One young man's determination, the headline read, transformed an entire community. Jimmy's story became particularly powerful. From a struggling teenager to a university-bound student, he represented everything the center stood for. He now volunteered, helping other young people find their path, just as Oliver had helped him. Local businesses began creating partnership programs with the center. Job training, internships, support networks, the ecosystem of opportunity continued to grow. What seemed impossible a year ago was now a living, breathing reality. Margaret's pride knew no bounds. During their weekly Sunday dinners, she would listen to Oliver's stories, remembering the struggling young man he had been. Her sacrifices, her unwavering belief, had helped create this moment. Helen from the library continued to be a mentor and supporter. She had seen many community initiatives come and go, but this one felt different. "You've created something special," she would tell Oliver, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. The community center expanded. New rooms were added, more programs developed. What had started as a small hope had become a powerful engine of social change. Oliver understood now that true leadership wasn't about titles or positions, but about listening, understanding, and believing in people's potential. Winter came, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities. The center now had winter support programs for homeless individuals, emergency food distribution, and heating support for elderly residents. Each initiative was carefully designed, each program a testament to community care. Oliver reflected on his journey. From a job-seeking young man to a community leader, his path had been anything but straightforward. But every challenge, every struggle had led him here. The town of Manchester had become a symbol of hope. Other communities began reaching out, wanting to understand their model of community support. Oliver found himself speaking at conferences, sharing the story of transformation. As the year drew to a close, a celebration was planned. Participants, volunteers, community leaders would gather to commemorate their collective journey. Jimmy would speak. Local business owners would share their stories. Margaret would sit proudly in the front row. Oliver understood now that success wasn't about personal achievement. It was about lifting others, creating opportunities, believing in the potential of community. The community center stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together. And at its heart was Oliver Thompson, a young man who had discovered that the greatest wealth was not in money, but in human connection. As night fell over Manchester, the center's lights continued to shine, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the incredible power of believing in one another.